One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello.
Hello.
I lost the overlay bit. That's where there was a little delay there. Hello.
There's the delay because we were on the moon.
Yeah, we had to get back to the moon.
Yeah.
Welcome to episode 37, a continuation of the Moon Mysteries series, where we'll be looking at the question. What's the question, Danielle? Always.
Did we land on the moon?
Did we go to the moon? Did we?
Did we?
I'm still not sure.
One of many questions regarding the moon, but yeah.
I'm still not sure. I can't decide.
Yeah.
I've got my doubts, but there's also... We'll get into all that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we all do.
However, I've got a very important announcement to make before we proceed. It is...
Don't do it.
It's Danielle's birthday, everybody!
Yeah, it's my birthday.
She's
Hi.
24 today.
Yeah, and holding.
Birthday.
I'm not getting any older. Staying right there. Yep.
Danielle's birthday.
It is my birthday.
So happy birthday. Many, many, many happy returns.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Even though you were talking about squirts before the show and it was weird.
Wait a minute. We were talking about hockey and the hockey levels and the names of each of those hockey levels in the U.S. So I don't...
You're sticking to it.
Huh?
I said that's...
Yeah, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
I would.
So, yeah. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Did you think you'd be sitting on your birthday talking about if we went to the moon?
No, I was thinking more like a steak dinner and a glass of wine or...
Well, you can always do that afterwards because it's still early there, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll go by myself. I'll go out.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'll get in contact with somebody in Michigan. I don't know anybody.
Okay.
I'm just going on Michigan notice board and say, can somebody go and meet Danielle Alves to celebrate her 24th birthday, please?
Yeah.
Right. Shall we just get right into it?
Well, I think we better because we've got quite a bit to cover because there's a lot of surprisingly not apparently these evidence in here, but apparently we've got quite a bit.
There's a lot of anomalies surrounding the Apollo missions, and apparently there's none, but according to official sources, and it was all fine and it all happened and nothing to question.
Nothing to question. Don't ever question.
There is questions, and we're going to look at them today. So let's get right down to it.
Shall we?
Yes, we shall.
Yes, we shall.
Right. So if you watched last week, you will see that we looked at humanity's innovative and creative efforts into obtaining flight in the lead up to space flight. We spoke about some of the failures and some of the breakthroughs in aviation. And that was very interesting. We talked about people slapping feathers on themselves and just hurtling themselves off buildings, all the way to the Wright brothers and Amelia Earhart and all the big names, you know them all. So the goal of those endeavours initially was to take to the skies. However, there seems to be an inherent want and need to traverse space and explore other planetary objects. And because the moon is the closest, it was the most obvious choice as the first destination in mankind's exploration of space. Some people believe or feel that it's almost an inherited human need or maybe a certain want to return home because a lot of people believe that we originate from the stars or to discover how everything became to be. How we were created, by whom and why. That's the biggest questions that humanity's got, isn't it, really? And we've always been seeking answers to those questions. We will probably investigate those kind of questions in a later episode as to did we come to the stars, etc. That gets really into a lot of esoteric stuff. Because that would require a lot of more in-depth analysis than we've got time to go into, and it would take away from the point in this episode. And there's an astronomic
See what you did there.
amount of evidence and research to achieve even a vague answer to or answers to those questions.
Yeah. So for now, well, let's take a closer look at our first steps into space and space exploration. For many people, the first moon landing was a momentous achievement and was praised as such, and quite rightly so. However, some people had their doubts. Even back then, and these questions and fears have loomed over humanity ever since. More accurately, over the years, people have been so unsettled by the event, in particular the anomalies surrounding it, that has led to more speculation that not only the first moon landing was staged, but even to the extent that some people question whether spaceflight is even possible today. It is easy just to dismiss these skeptical views as nonsense created by crackpots suffering from mental delusions, what we've heard all throughout before.
You're crazy.
Shutting the claims down without taking the time to analyse and review the evidence presented with an open mind. And so, that's always been debunked, and then there's no debunking going on. Not properly sufficient, anyhow.
We've given you the answer. Shut up.
Yeah, we've their way is just deleting people's accounts who post things. That's what I say.
Right.
Yeah, we feel this is a severe injustice because, like it or not, there's a vast amount of evidence there is to support this conspiracy, and there is still legitimate reasons why the whole event may have been fabricated, as you can imagine.
And oftentimes the answers that they give just pose even more questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, before we go into more depth into the anomaly surrounding the moon landing, we will look at the official timeline and narrative surrounding the Apollo program, which in itself also raises certain questions, as you'll find out.
Absolutely. So
Danielle's going to start diving into Apollo.
I am. So there always has to start with the number one, right? Apollo 1 was the first planned manned Apollo mission, the final goal being to land on the moon, carrying astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, or Caffrey, depending on how you pronounce that. A 14-day orbit of Earth was planned and due to take place on February 21st, 1967. Unfortunately, this mission would never take place, and all 3 crew members tragically died in a fire during a launch pad test at Cape Canaveral. Cape Kennedy. Cape Kennedy.
That's funny. I said that as well when I read through it before.
Did you?
Yeah.
See, I don't know. Cape Kennedy on January 27th of 1967. And here's the picture here. It is tragic. So following this tragedy, a review board was formed to investigate. And in its report, it stated the Apollo team failed to give adequate attention to certain mundane but equally vital questions of crew safety. The board's investigation revealed many deficiencies in design and engineering, manufacture and quality control. And when these deficiencies are corrected, the overall reliability of Apollo program will be increased greatly, end quote. There were many faults found. The entire mooncraft was shoddily assembled using inadequate parts and with no concern for crew safety. The astronauts themselves were concerned and half jokingly posed for a picture in front of the model of the craft praying, which is what you saw in that previous picture, because they were all too aware of the issues and had even expressed those concerns due to NASA. So, I mean, how spooky is that they did that prior to the incident that took place in the tragedy?
I think the worst thing is, I think there was a safety mechanism which locked the door shut. So when the fire was off, they couldn't get open because the safety mechanism was counterproductive and actually trapped them in rather than let them out.
There was a lot of things like the amount of combustible materials on board and the fact that they had like 100% oxygen and a single spark set it on fire, and within 80 seconds it was gone and they couldn't get the door open.
Well, and they were passing the buck as to whose fault it really was.
Yeah,
I mean that's the official explanation of what happened, and that's 1967 and the first Apollo spacecraft, and it was riddled with problems. But 2 years later, right, as a result of the findings of the Apollo 1 inquiries, crewed Apollo flights were suspended for 20 months, while the command module's hazards were addressed. Due to this and serious technical and safety issues, like we just went over, uncovered in the investigation of the fire, the planned mission of Apollo 2 was cancelled, as was Apollo 3. and therefore the Apollo program would restart with Apollo 4. So it went straight from Apollo 1 to Apollo 4. And that was on November the 9th, 1967. This, because of the 20-month ban on manned flights, was an unmanned test flight of the Saturn V launch rocket that would eventually take man to the moon, allegedly.
Allegedly. Yeah.
So in January 1968, Apollo 5 saw the first Earth orbital flight test of the Lunar module that would eventually take astronauts to the surface of the moon. So the rocket would get them there, and the Lunar module would separate off and do the descent onto the moon. Then in April of 1968, the third and final uncrewed flight took place with Apollo 6. And I've got a picture of that one there. And that would either qualify or disqualify the Saturn V for manned missions. Surprisingly, despite it being what many would call a failure, with multiple engine failure occurring, causing the remaining engines to overburn, and then one of them would not restart at all, the mission led to Saturn V being approved for manned missions. So there was a lot of issues.
It's like, just push forward anyway.
They approved it anyway. After what happened with Apollo 1, and then this was like a big fuck-up, really, but they called it a success because they did get back safely, but there was a lot of problems. And that was only in low Earth orbit. But despite the issues it encountered, it was approved.
Yeah.
That's just an example of what's wrong with a lot of things.
Yeah. Apollo 7, carrying the crew that was supposed to man Apollo 2, Walter Schirra, Don Essiel, and Walter Cunningham, took off on an 11-day mission on October the 11th, 1968, from Cape Kennedy, Florida. The objectives of this mission was the first manned orbit of the Command Service module. This mission also saw the first televised broadcast, even, from an American spacecraft. Despite consistent arguments between the crew and the mission control over what was the crew felt was putting them at undue risk, obviously they were aware of some of these issues, the mission was deemed a success.
Again.
But the astronauts involved would never get to go in space ever again. According to James Lovell, an astronaut on Apollo 8, quote, Apollo 7 was a very successful flight. They did an excellent job, apparently, but it was a very contentious flight. They all teed off the ground. They teed off the ground people quite considerably, and I think that kind of put a stop to their future flights, or at least for them. Following that success, Apollo 8 launched on December the 21st, 1968, carrying astronauts James Lovell, William Anders, and Frank Borman. This was the first crewed flight to the moon. They made 10 lunar orbits in 20 hours, but did not land on the moon, and then safely returned to Earth. Strange,
Yeah,
I
so
think.
this
How
is
unusual.
Apollo 8 actually went to the moon and just flew around it
Yeah.
10 times. It traversed the Van Allen radiation belt,
So
so
they-
then went all the way there, flew around it, come back, went through the deadly radiation belts again, and landed on Earth. But they didn't land on the moon. Even
Never
though they
landed
went-
on the moon.
And I believe they had the equipment, didn't
Yeah.
they?
Jamie did quite a good
An
analogy of this. It's like putting a caravan, hooking a caravan up to your car,
Yeah.
and then driving for 700
to a
miles
holiday
to a
destination.
holiday destination, and being like, well, we can get there,
Yeah.
turning round and going home without even going on holiday with your caravan. Well, we're able to drive there and get there safely, going home, and then giving the caravan to somebody completely different and saying, well, you go on holiday.
Yeah. It's safe enough for you to
Yeah.
use, and the car
It's
don't
able,
overheat.
it's able to get there, so you go.
Yeah.
But they never go to the destination either,
No. Allegedly.
allegedly. Capital letters, allegedly. So it is a good analogy, though, Jamie. I mean, for sure, puts it in perspective. But Apollo 9 then followed in March of 1969 and was the first flight of the full Apollo spacecraft with the Saturn V, the command and service module, and the lunar module. The purpose of this mission was for the crew to fly the lunar module in low Earth orbit and demonstrate its ascent and descent propulsion systems before redocking with the command and service module. They also tested the portable life support system backpack outside of the lunar module cabin. Apollo 10 was manned by Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan, and launched on May 18, 1969. This was the second manned Apollo mission to orbit the moon. Described as a dress rehearsal, the intention was to test all components and features, short of actually descending to and landing on the lunar surface. The astronauts flew the lunar module to within 14.4 kilometers, that's 7.8 miles, of the surface of the moon, to the point where a powered descent would begin before returning the lunar module back to orbit and redocking with the command module and then returning to Earth.
So
So again, they took the caravan and not went on holiday.
That's asked about face. You would have thought they'd have tested that part of it before going there, just in case they had to, even if it was an emergency landing they had to make.
Well, the first one
It doesn't
just
make sense.
allegedly orbited the moon. The second one has not only orbited the moon, but took the actual lunar landing module to within 7 miles of the moon's surface and then just turned around and went home.
Yeah.
It's like, nah, we're not landing. We don't have time for this.
We don't want the time.
But when they were testing in the low orbit, in Earth's low orbit, that's when they're a perfect opportunity to do all these other tests, and that should have been done before they went. Oh, I don't know. It's just bizarre.
So that was Apollo 10. And we all know what comes next.
Yeah.
The most famous and admittedly controversial of all the Apollo missions, Apollo 11, crewed by none other than Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, who would go down in history as the first crewed landing on the surface of the moon. Here they are. We all know what they look like. The Saturn V rocket took off with a command service module named Columbia and the Lunar Module 5, also known as Eagle, on July the 16th, 1969. 5 days later, the world would watch as Neil Armstrong allegedly took his first tentative steps on the surface of the moon in the area known as the Sea of Tranquility and uttered those now famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
One giant hoax for mankind.
James, don't be so skeptical. Shortly thereafter, he was joined by Buzz Aldrin, and the pair stayed on the moon's surface for 21 hours and 36 minutes, allegedly, where they collected 21.5 kilograms of lunar material, allegedly, to bring back to Earth. Allegedly.
I don't remember seeing allegedly.
Let's just assume that's allegedly everywhere.
Yeah, just add allegedly after everything.
Yeah.
So, there would be, after Apollo 11, 6 more Apollo missions, with all landing on the moon. And I've got a little image to go with that. That's the moon, and that is the landing sites, which quite far apart, but as you can see, there's still a lot there that's unexplored.
Well,
that's only one side.
When they allegedly take their little camper van and caravan to these holiday locations, they seem to keep going back to the same holiday destination, don't they?
Yeah.
That's a big place.
Yeah, why are they just going to the same spots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot there still to be explored, in my opinion.
Over the last how many years? 55?
Yeah, 55 years. Long time to do nothing.
I think we would have seen more by now.
So there was these 6 more missions, and as I said, they all landed on the moon. Except for Apollo 13, which was aborted after an oxygen tank exploded 2 days into the mission, which disabled both electrical and life support systems.
Well, it's certainly going to happen on the 13th
That was,
one.
I mean, that wasn't fatal. They did manage to return to Earth, but 13 was unlucky for some.
Yeah.
Good point, Jamie.
So the Apollo program ended after the 6th moon landing. Perhaps it was the 5th. Perhaps it didn't happen at all. We'll look into that. And that was Apollo 17, which was crewed by Eugene Cernan, Ronald Evans, and Harrison Schmitt. The mission was launched on December the 7th, 1972, and the astronauts returned to Earth on December the 19th. That's 12 days later. Schmitt became the first scientist to set foot on the moon. As well as the astronauts, there were 5 mice on board, nicknamed Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum and Fooey. And they travelled to the moon in specially constructed tubes. And I don't know where the picture's going of that.
I was going to say, I think we had...
It is there somewhere. There it is.
16. Oh, there it is. There you go. That's the little tubes that they were put in. And they stayed in that tube for the entire journey. And there were little pocket mice, apparently.
Little pocket mice?
So, yeah. Very reminiscent of Laika. Remember
What
Laika?
What was the purpose of having...
I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay.
Because humanity are wankers, Danielle.
Yeah.
Generally.
Right. So, they're in the little tubes, and one of them died during the return journey. Cause of that was undetermined. And the others were then euthanized and dissected upon their return to Earth.
Oh my
To
God.
check for signs of damage due to cosmic radiation. Lesions were discovered in their scalps and their livers, but it was concluded that this was not the result of radiation. Something caused it.
So something caused it, yeah.
We don't know what. Apparently,
And
they weren't related, so it wasn't a genetic thing. But it wasn't radiation, and it was never explained what it was.
Weren't they like safe in their little tubes? And that like being in the manned ship?
Well,
Yeah,
Had
exactly.
they indeed gone through the Van Allen belt, there's quite a lot of radiation
They're
in
protected
there.
in
Yeah, I
there,
know, but the astronauts did okay.
Yeah, but they weren't little mice spacesuits, so that made all the difference.
No, they just had their little naked bodies,
No,
naked mice furry
Is it-
bodies.
because that that little
I don't know.
fabric.
But I mean, why? What was the need? They didn't learn anything.
No, that
Apparently.
little fabric suit with a couple of layers of foil and what are protected.
Probably just to say that they did. Yeah, we ran some tests. We cut through a few mice and...
Yeah.
Jamie,
There were plans for at least 3 further Apollo missions, 18, 19, and 20. But these were cancelled due to the failure of Apollo 13 and significant budget cuts. At the time, 35 of NASA's 49 active astronauts were waiting for a mission, and 2 complete Saturn V rockets went unused after Apollo program came to an end. One is on display at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and the other at Johnson Space Center in Texas. A massive waste of the money invested to their creation and their technology, which apparently took man to the moon. The cancelled Flight Command Service modules and Lunar modules also went either completely unused or were reused for other missions. Again, one completed lunar module is on display at the Kennedy Space Center, and a completed command service module is at the Johnson Space Center, which when they said they destroyed all the crap to go again, well, there's a couple of items there sitting there.
well,
waiting.
they're like the picture I've got on the screen is the display at the Kennedy Space Center with the different sections.
Yeah.
That is a complete module. That is a complete. It's got the Saturn V. It's got the command and service. It's got the lunar module. That apparently is perfectly capable of going to the moon.
Yeah.
But for
Quick check
55
over.
years, it sat at the Kennedy Space Center as a visitor attraction.
Yeah.
How much money was invested in making that?
Just to have it sit there.
Yeah.
And as Kennedy said, the taxpayers were going to pay for it, and you certainly did. You paid for this to gather dust.
Mm-hmm. So, Lunar Module 13, which was to be assigned to Apollo 18, was only partially completed. However, it was kept and was later used as a prop in the 1998 HBO miniseries From Earth to Moon, before becoming part of a display at the Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island, New York.
So it was a very good and convincing prop, was it?
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Movie prop.
So it does seem bizarre that despite the reduction in the funding, when NASA had complete systems in place to launch further missions, they stopped. No further investment was required for the technology that got them to the moon 6 times,
Allegedly.
allegedly. They had the Saturn V rockets, the command and service modules, and the lunar modules. And they had no shortage of trained astronauts ready and willing to man further missions. The money had already been spent, but in 1972 we stopped sending men to the moon, and in the decades that followed, we have never returned, allegedly.
Why?
Why? Yeah. Well, let's find out.
Everything is a big secret, right?
I mean, a number of reasons. It could be that they never went in the first place, which a lot of people believe. It could be that they were warned to stay away.
Could be.
We shall find out.
Off you fuck.
Lisa.
Or it could be that they just made it all up. And they
Yeah.
couldn't be bothered lying anymore, so like, well, just stop. So, whilst there's controversy surrounding all of the moon landings and the validity of the claim that we ever actually sent a manned mission to the moon, there is equal controversy over the reasoning behind why we have never returned. This is something we'll discuss later as we go over various questions surrounding the reality of the moon landings and get into things like the Van Allen belt, etc. Whilst there are many who believe that none of the Apollo missions were real and all of them were staged by the US government as part of a massive conspiracy, there are just as many who believe that Apollo 11 alone was fake for political motivations in the midst of the Cold War and that subsequent missions were in fact real. Others still believe that the missions did not end with Apollo 17 and carried on in secret due to discoveries made on the surface of the moon that the powers that be felt should be hidden from the general public. There's so many questions and so many conclusions that you can come to.
And we never get a true answer.
And I'm still undecided. I think there's just so much bullshit that you know that there's something wrong.
Well,
it's just putting your finger on exactly. There's so many different pieces to the puzzle.
Well, it's not like they've been honest with us.
together.
Yeah.
Sorry, Danielle, what were you saying?
I said it's not like they've ever been honest with us, right?
well
I mean,
no, that's mainly the problem, that they get upset and they get angry at people questioning, but people don't get the proper answers, or when they do, it's nonsensical stuff or add to a little more mysteries, and they say crap themselves, which confuses people even more and puts more questions.
I was going to say it makes you ask more questions more than anything.
Yeah. And then we've got the different amount of theories out there, whether or not they've been to the moon, and it's staggering, to be honest, the amount of stuff. Yes, admittedly, the internet likes to remove quite a few of them, but we've probably heard the theories throughout the years, and they're beyond absurd, some of them. We could spend forever discussing every insane theory ever anyone's ever spoke about the moon, but whether or not giant aliens with golden triangular heads have a secret base on the moon and warned humanity to stay away.
That's actually a thing, by the way.
It is a thing.
Yeah, it's something that we'll neither waste our time or yours debating.
Yeah, let's not go there because it's stupid.
Nor will entertain the notion that there is no moon and we're all characters in some kind of Truman-esque show, being broadcast to a superior alien race.
Hey, that's a theory in itself. I mean, that's a show in itself right there, actually.
Yeah, I'm not going. I don't think that an alien's going to find any satisfaction in watching me on the telly.
Satisfaction or just intrigue?
Yeah, watching me get salmonella.
Well, I do believe that.
No, thank you.
I do believe that there's a possibility that something or someone or something is monitoring us and knows that. But I don't think it's quite to that extreme. But we'll look at actual genuine questions which have basis in reality and not honest concerns raised by those who have researched this topic and dared to question the many anomalies surrounding NASA and the Apollo program, because these do exist, which we've just said. And those questions deserve to be asked and explanations should be sought. And when reasonable explanations are not forthcoming or the answers provided only serve pose further questions, then it's hardly surprising that those who are asking these questions experience a lack of trust in those who we sought to find those answers, like NASA and things like that. And you'll find out
Trust
some of the
no
footage
one.
you'll see.
Trust no one.
A lot of these questions
Except
have been
me.
addressed.
Trust me because I'm trustworthy.
Trust no one, but trust her.
Yeah. So now that was the timeline of the Apollo program from Apollo 1 all the way to Apollo 17, which was allegedly the last one.
Yeah.
And now we're going to look at, was the moon landing faked? This will focus mainly
Was
on Apollo 11, but there is some elements from the later
The other
missions
ones.
that we will go over. As
this is so controversial, but
so
there's
take it away, Danielle Alvis, the birthday girl.
the birthday girl. All right. So one of the first questions we must ask regarding the possibility of a faked moon landing is why? Well, there are a few legitimate. Why not?
Yeah.
There's a few legitimate and logical answers to this question. The foremost being is it was the only way for America to catch up with the Soviets for the space race. And then they were, by their own admission, behind in their efforts in space exploration and technology, let alone being able to place a man safely and securely onto the lunar surface. So 13 days before the launch of Apollo 11, the Soviets had launched their Luna 15 module. I think we have a picture of that.
Yes, we do.
We do.
We've got a picture on a stamp.
On a stamp. This was a robotic space.
It looks weird though, doesn't it?
Well, it was robotic, right?
I know it's a stamp, but it does look like a bit cartoony.
Well, what year were we talking? They probably didn't have good graphic art. But like I said, it was a robotic spacecraft, and its objective was to land on the moon's surface and then collect rock and soil samples. And it was intended to return to Earth with these things, propelling the Soviets even further ahead in the space race, and for them to achieve yet another first, as they had with Sputnik, in the missions that they took with Sputnik. And Laika, if you remember last week with Laika. So, yeah, poor Laika, the dog.
I'm never going to get over that.
I know you're not. It's okay, Lisa. This goal was unsuccessful, however, and Luna 15 was in orbit around the moon as the Apollo astronauts were on the surface of the moon, and it crashed into the moon's surface just hours before the scheduled American liftoff from the moon.
What a coinkydink.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. We can call it that. Some people, unsurprisingly, found this accident suspicious. Go figure. As it conveniently crashed at the right time to allow America to not only take the goal of being the first to place a man on the moon, but now they would be able to achieve this first to collect materials from the moon also.
There's nothing to see here, Daniel. You're just looking for things now.
Yeah, it's pareidolia.
I'm just looking for things. Hey, these are questions we've all asked, right?
By the way, the picture on the right of the moon, in that last picture, that shows you just where the Apollo 11 apparently landed and where this crash site was, which isn't too far away. So you can imagine a little nudge of something or here, a nudge of something there.
Well, that's where the lunar module landed, but where is the command service module with Michael Collins at the time?
Exactly.
Not that I'm saying that he done anything to it, because that would be accusatory, and I'm not doing it. Yeah. I'm not accusing Michael Collins of making it crash or anything.
Well, you don't have to accuse, but we can speculate as to what the mysteries were, right? What happened, what caused these things. Allegedly.
So, many opponents to the fake landing theory often quote Neil deGrasse Tyson. And if you don't know who he is, it's that smarmy twat over there. That's enough of him. Where he suggested that to fake the moon landing would have been a far more difficult accomplishment than to actually go there.
Which is kind of ridiculous.
I beg to differ.
Yeah.
To travel through space 58 years after you first made a 58-second flight just on Earth, through a massive belt of two massive belts of radiation, because it comes in two parts, for thousands of miles, and land on a different surface with different gravity, it's not easier than setting up a stage and getting a camera.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they did set up a stage and get a camera, but that's a ludicrous proposition.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Don't come for her.
Don't come for me. One of his and other people's arguments to support that a staging event was impossible is the amount of people that would have had to been involved in the ruse. They often state that 400,000 people would have to take part in the deception, And furthermore, none of these have ever ended their silence and admitted guilt. Really? Really? And if you just take that on face value and like, oh, right, that's true. You're right. We went to the moon. That's bullshit. Sorry.
4,000.
400,000 people involved, but they weren't all in the know.
Yeah.
This would be a strong argument. However, it's flawed. And they may have actually fallen for parts of the ruse themselves. Just because somewhere someone suggested it had taken 400,000 doesn't mean it was necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people required to take part in the staging would have been much less. Certain government employees would most likely have been aware. A small production crew, perhaps, and as little as 3 actors would have been required, assuming that the real astronauts didn't play themselves in the alleged performance. Even a media outlet too, to help convince the world of what they were seeing was real. It wouldn't be the first or last time that any of these kind of people have taken part in such a deception.
You just frightened the cat.
First or last. I was going to say, was that one of your kids?
Yeah, the cat just jumped out of my skin. Lisa was so convincing.
I'm sorry, Maya. I'm very passionate about the moon. And more importantly, they remained silent throughout the years. Because the media aren't exactly trustworthy
themselves.
And neither's the government, so
shock horror.
The implications of which are astronomical.
So, what about the other people involved? For instance, engineers must have known, right? Well, again, maybe not. Firstly, it would be possible that they too could have been lied to. They believed they were in fact creating parts and machinery in the endeavour. So, obviously taking part in the deception totally unaware. It is important to note that even though this fake may have been needed at the time, there is nothing to suggest that they weren't continuing to try and make a real effort to reach the stars. It was, as we stated, just for them to catch up. Engineering is often decompartmentalized. And I'm surprised I said that right.
I'm surprised as well.
Usually, it takes many people to create anything mechanical in nature. A manufacturing company, for instance, in Texas could have been responsible for creating a certain component for an engine, while a company in North Dakota could have been making another component. Each have an idea of what they are making, but not its ultimate use. And they would be unaware that each of them are working on the same, quote, same engine.
If they all knew, then anybody would be able to recreate the technology.
Exactly.
And they don't want anybody to recreate the technology.
Yeah. They wouldn't know what the engine was going to be used for. And they would never been aware that they may have been taking part in one of the largest ruses ever perpetrated.
And also, to come to this 400,000 number, they're counting look at that manufacturing company in Texas. Just say that's got 1,000 employees. They're counting all of them as being in on it. But I mean, if only 3 people in that company worked on one certain component and they had no idea what it was actually eventually going to be used for, those 3 wouldn't even know.
Which is
they're counting all the employees in that factory.
Yeah,
it's not unheard of to do. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I believe that it was done totally unrelated to the moon, but they did similar things with the translation of the Bible.
Exactly.
You didn't have one person translating the whole Bible in itself. Yeah. My understanding that there were people that had bits and parts of it for some of the same reasons. They wanted allegedly a truer translation. So, I mean, it's like I said, it's not the first or last time we hear any of these kinds of things.
No, that's exactly what happens in nearly everyday life. But there's a need to know as well. And some people just don't need to know. They're just, somebody's just putting little rubber feet on a piece of machinery. They're not going to need to know, what it's going for. So that's absurd. Mm-hmm. Then we have computing. Well, as we know, computers and computing were in their infancy back then, even new to the specialists of the time, because there's always specialists, and we've heard of these specialists. A computer, like an engine, has many parts, and it takes many people to even put a standard PC together. As we know, you get work lines where everyone's doing a certain little bit, and resistors are being made over here, capacitors are being made in this factory, and we see that all the time, and that's what it says. So that's bullshit. Sorry.
It's horseshit,
It is
according to
horseshit.
Jamie. You
Tell
heard
us
it
how you
here
really
first, man.
feel there, James.
Yeah.
Danielle Alvis. It's
yeah,
a birthday
so-
girl. It's a birthday girl's turn to tell you things.
I'm going to tell you things. So we could dissect every aspect involved with manufacturing and creating items that were needed, spacesuits too, if you wish, but that would take too long just to reach the same conclusion, or at least the same possibility that these integral parts could easily be manufactured and distributed with extremely limited knowledge of their purpose or purposes. Or, as we just mentioned, perhaps they were making genuine articles for future attempts to achieve spaceflight, yet this time it was just to get ahead of the game or fake it until you make it. And money, fake it until you make it. Money is often mentioned too, of course, and it would have been really, really expensive, right? Just to lie, when they could have used the money to physically go instead of wasting it on props.
If they were able
just in the
to,
food
though,
props. Yeah.
you're assuming that they had the ability.
Well, the money was available. JFK took care of that one during his speech when he informed the American public that they would pay for this pursuit in the way of taxes.
Yeah, and your taxes paid for the waste that's sitting on display in a museum.
I know. Taxation is theft.
It is. That is.
So, as the saying goes, money cannot buy everything. Maybe it was true in regard to this mission. Maybe after pumping millions of dollars into the project, only to watch the investment literally burn up in flames, they had to take drastic actions to not only stay in the race, but still win. How costly would it have been to inform the taxpayers that they have wasted their forced investment into nothing more than expensive giant fireworks that have repeatedly crashed and burned for the display of the limited people in the know?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of them lies that gets dodgier and dodgier and trickier and trickier.
Yeah, once you've lied, and you've got to have further lies to cover up
Yeah.
that lie, and it just gets so huge.
More lies to cover as you go. Yeah.
And then you get to a point now, actually admitting that you lied in the first place. You've told so many lies that you can't do that.
You've forgotten what you lied about.
Mm-hmm. So,
Somebody's keeping record.
Oh, sorry, what was that, Danielle?
Somebody's keeping records somewhere.
Yeah,
Mhm.
somebody's keeping a tally.
Yeah. Probably the viewers of the Truman Show that we're all living in.
Yeah.
So, in the opinion of the American government, the cost of failure was extremely high, but not only in monetary terms, but also in political and global terms. If they didn't take action, or the action that some believe that they did at the time, then it was not only the cost of losing the space race, but possibly their position of being the world's #1 superpower, which they are today. Conceding this position to the Soviets was something that they wouldn't and couldn't allow, especially considering the Cold War that was still in motion and very active then. One could argue that this Cold War never even ended. After all, it seems that America and Russia almost enjoy blaming and accusing each other of dodgy shit, even to this day. Don't they just?
Mm-hmm.
Russia! Do they really distrust each other that much, though? Was the world really gripped in a Cold War? After all, the main possibility of this space race was a result of both competitors of the race obtaining scientists from the Germans. Werner von Braun actually created the Saturn V rocket, which took man into space, allegedly. The Germans should have been punished for war crimes rather than being allowed to aid in this endeavour for both countries to reach the moon. For two competing superpowers that find each other so distrusting and consider each as possible foes, they still managed to work together quite well. The space station, which there is a picture of that as well, and I've not caught up with my slides. There we go. Is that it?
That is it, yeah.
Yeah. The space station is another prime example of this. Of course, there have been incidents to foster distrust even in that partnership, like the infamous Hole incident in 2018 when a drill hole was discovered in the Russian Soyuz spacecraft whilst docked at the International Space Station. This particular incident was investigated by both NASA and the Russian authorities, and accusations and denials were thrown back and forth for 3 years until 2021, but ultimately it led to nothing. Even now, as we are constantly fed media reports to spawn distrust in Russia, and the Russians, on the other side, are fed exactly the same about the West. The possibility of going into war is being presented constantly at the moment. Both factions are allegedly up there, however, on the International Space Station, working together, living together, sharing research, sharing technology, and escorting each other to and from the station without any problems.
And drinking each other's pee.
Yeah, and drinking each other's, because that's what they do.
Apparently.
Allegedly, that's what they do.
Thank you for saying allegedly.
They filter their piss to drink.
Yeah. And yes, Lisa, that scaffolding frame on the right is the space station, allegedly. And we know that there's like all these there's other countries involved as well, but Russia and America are obviously the main people because they're the ones with the money and the power and stuff. So,
wait a minute, I don't know a picture.
The whole.
That is just from 2018.
Oh,
the little drill hole that they found in the space station. It's one tiny hole in the capsule, but one giant mystery for mankind.
Indeed.
Is a rogue astronaut trying to sabotage the International Space Station? Well, they investigated, they blamed each other, and then nothing happened.
If you look anyway, you can see it's a mistake because you can see the jutter marks of the drill bit where it's missed.
I was just going to say that. It looks like
They're trying to drill that hole up there, you see, and they've got a big hole there. So what's the difference? That's been my question. There's a hole about 3 times the size above it.
Yeah.
So what is that an issue for? I don't know. Fucking idiots.
Yes.
That's of course if we assume the space station is real. There are doubts and questions about
there's people that think that that's not really there either. So
exactly.
But we're not going to get into that because that's too...
Well, and to be fair, there is some odd things spotted in the footage of the station and some of the crew, which we've actually got some of that, making strange comments.
I have seen some weird videos, like them trying to like brush their hair and like not look at it. And it looks weird. It doesn't look like they're in no gravity.
I haven't seen that.
There is some really odd crap.
The way that because they're not, like, they're obviously in a zero gravity environment, but their hair's not acting as if it's in a zero, and I don't know. But
I mean, there's some...
I don't know what your hair's supposed to do in a zero gravity environment, so I've got no idea.
We need to conduct our own experiment.
I mean, there's so much more to cover before we reach that point anyway. But return to skeptics' questions about why and how many people that would have been clued in on the fakery, we should address the ground control team. Ground control? Yeah, I can't sing.
To Major Tom.
Do that. Particularly in the capsule communicators, or Capcom, which is a video game software company.
Them.
Yeah.
Them.
There they are.
That's Charlie Duke at the front there. We're going to talk about him in a minute.
So we're talking about like a whole bunch of people who would be keyed in on the deception. Well, this team wasn't as large as people perceive. In fact, there was only one person ever communicated directly with the Apollo 11 crew.
It was them.
Obviously, other than Nixon's phone call.
It was him.
That was astronaut Charles Duke, who later was part of the Apollo 16 crew and was apparently the 10th person to set on the lunar surface. So, of course, so he was, you do this for us and you get to go, mate.
He does look a bit shifty, in my opinion.
He did have backup crewmen, Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes, but it was he alone who handled all communications from the Apollo 11 crew.
Which in itself is weird. I mean, they were there for quite a long time, and he was the only person that spoke to them.
Well, yeah, there was backup as
allegedly.
Allegedly,
the word for today is allegedly.
Yeah. There was also approximately another half dozen people allocated to Capcom. Don't know what they did there. Don't know what their roles were. They were probably more than likely there to throw up pieces of paper when the eagle had landed, just like we see in all the movies.
Every movie and TV show, when they do something like that, they all throw the paperwork.
They have this big pile of paperwork. Yay!
Yeah.
Yay! Really?
So as you can see again, the people who may be involved with the the ruse, the hoax, is probably limited to quite a few. So it gives you a perception that there was like loads of them in there, but there wasn't. Right, Danielle.
400,000 to be exact,
Yeah.
or in an estimate.
Must have been
Because that's a fact.
jam-packed in Capcom.
I want to know if we were allowed to fact check that. Like, has there been really 4,000 people involved? You know,
I went at
they're
400,000.
allowed to check
400.
every single
Even
individual.
4,000 I'd find a bit hard to believe, but 400,000.
Yeah.
Throwing all those papers in the air is how they lost the tech. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what
That's
happened.
exactly what
I'm
happened.
thinking that-
Kenny. Well done. You've
I'm
solved
thinking
it.
that it was just a bunch of blank paper, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
And yes, they are piss takers when they're drinking each other's piss. They might as well be, yeah.
so
Anywho,
Anyway.
would Capcom have been aware of the illusion possibly taking place in front of them? Maybe. However, it's likely that they too would not have had a clue, and therefore were just pawns used in this elaborate game of chess being played by the American government, because that's what the government likes to do.
What they like to do.
Allegedly.
They love their chess.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had audible communications only after all with Charles Duke, the single person speaking directly to the astronauts. As for visual evidence, they were subjected to the same grainy footage as everyone else. The footage that could have been better and clearer. However, as we will get to see soon, this footage seemed to have been created intentionally using methods that make no sense, unless it was supposed to. I lost my spot here.
The grade.
But it seemed to
purposely
be
degrade the overall quality of production.
There you
Yeah.
go.
You
A
just
president
purposely
would
degraded
lie. Yeah.
Sorry.
I said the president wouldn't lie, would they?
No.
No.
Why would
No.
they?
How very dare you, Danielle?
I know, speculation, right? So the question next is, if this was all a fabrication, would the president himself been aware that it was being carried out?
Surely not, because they're very trustworthy.
Yeah, firstly, the presidents and leaders of the world make a career in lying. It's their craft, right? I didn't say that, did I? Oh.
That's offensive.
And they're well trained and versed in deceit and espionage, allegedly. They hold these positions because of their efficiency in doing so. And the words politicians and liars seem to go hand in hand, don't they? Or, if their lips are moving.
Yeah.
Are you
somebody
accusing
speaking in their earpiece.
that very honourable little man, Joe Biden, of being a liar?
Yeah.
I don't think he's got a brain capacity to lie, to be honest. Allegedly.
Well, sometimes they lie in an honest attempt to protect their countries, people, or assets. Other times they lie and deceive for nefarious reasons, which are, my guess, usually the majority of the time, right?
More often, yeah.
Yeah. When JFK made his famous moon speech, almost no one suspected that it may have been the starting point of contention. It's likely that he was being genuinely earnest. After all, at the time, the feat may have seemed very possible in theory, but was it possible in practice? Until recently, many people believed the President of America was the ultimate figure of power and knowledge. However, they themselves are controlled, manipulated, and often deceived, just like the rest of us. They too are on a need-to-know basis. Regardless of JFK's intentions, as we said in the last episode, by 1969 and the Apollo 11 mission, he was unfortunately no longer around to see the outcome. As we know, JFK's life was ended on November the 22nd, 1963. Only just over a year after his speech, and only 2 months after he tried pushing for a joint mission with the Russians in a speech to the United Nations General Assembly. And that in itself is very suspicious. And there is a lot of people who believe that his assassination was based around the fact that he wanted to do a joint mission with the Russians to the moon.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other episode as well. What happened to JFK?
I was just going to say, as far as that component of all of this, there are many reasons why
multiple theories
he was taken out. So
it was on this. I'm undecided.
Yeah.
On JFK, I am 100% convinced that he was taken out by
Oh, yeah.
possibly a three-letter agency. However, the reason, there's so many
There's so
different
many.
possibilities for the reason that I'm not settled on the reason, but I do know that it wasn't a little man with a little shitty weapon in the Texas school book depository who was then murdered by Jack Ruby. Oh, no.
With bullets that don't even match on the scene.
I'm pretty sure.
Anyway, that's the whole other episode. Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Before we go on, I'm just going to say I'm pretty certain that it probably was more than just one reason.
Yeah, definitely.
So, many people consider there's a massive deception around his death. Even people who initially believed the whole event played out as we were told have over time admitted the circumstances surrounding his assassination just don't add up, and they most certainly do not. Most people, at the very least, believe that there was more than one shooter that must have been present, and even some employees of those three-letter agencies have come forward themselves with their own suspicions and doubts surrounding the official narrative.
Yeah.
By 1969, America had a new president, Richard Nixon. And I've got a picture of him, just in case you don't know who he is. That's him.
If you don't know who he is, come out from under that rock.
We've got old Dick Nixon. And then at the top, that is a picture of him on the founded Apollo 11.
Apparently.
Allegedly, while they're on the moon. And bizarrely, he's got a picture of the moon behind him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go figure, huh?
Yeah. And then that's a little plaque that was on the Eagle spacecraft that was left on the moon.
So someone said, hey, the president's talking to the Apollo mission guys. Somebody grab a camera and let's take a picture of him while he's talking to them.
Yeah. How convenient. Great time in these people.
Wanted to make sure that's how it went down.
Yeah.
And that little plaque that was left on the moon has got all the signatures of the Apollo astronauts and Nixon on it.
So the picture's there as well, conveniently at the same time with the phone call.
Yeah.
So we've got 1969. He's in charge. Some people believe that JFK's demise could have been engineered by an unseen force within the American government, and that paved the way for a president less honest and more willing to toe the line. Richard Nixon was a perfect candidate. After all, everyone remembers or knows about Watergate.
Indeed.
All he did was pretend to not know. That's all.
Yeah. He didn't know what was going on.
All he did was lie and shit.
Well, I mean, he didn't. He just he pretended not to know about it. That's okay.
He just dismissed.
Sounds very similar.
Like everyone else.
I'm getting vibes of I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Then years later, actually said that they actually went on talk show. Yeah, well, we did, and I felt bad and all this. And then he obviously carried on. Whatever. Anyway, many people found the time frame between JFK's speech and Apollo 11 launch too short. There was a lot to do, funds to be acquired, new machines and technology to be developed and tested. It was an endeavour that would require many people with exceptional skill and knowledge to bring the dream to reality. This was a new territory for everyone. There were only a few considered experts in the field of spaceflight, and clearly they had a lot more to discover and learn before the deadline set by the president. Obviously, we've seen all that and about some of the disasters.
Yeah.
Once they got up to date, they had to then train and educate others in their findings and knowledge. So it doesn't just stop at them. Obviously, two people in the know, because these experts aren't going to get their hands dirty. They've got to teach other people, and other people have got
experts. Come on now.
Yeah, vehicles had to be redesigned, and created. For instance, the fuel systems were inadequate, just as Kennedy had mentioned in his speech. Facilities had to be built, or at least refurbished to accommodate the new space program. As we learned last episode, NACA became NASA. So that too was new and certainly needed to be brought up to spec. There was something there. Obviously, they weren't knowledgeable of all of this. So again, they had to be retrained. Computers and circuitry was new, as we mentioned. Transistors, for instance, only surfaced in the late 50s. So as you can imagine how limited the knowledge was, that the experts had at the time, never mind the cost of the components required and the limitations of their components in comparison to what we have available now.
They were bloody expensive.
Yeah, they were. For example, in 1956, IBM launched the Ramac 305.
Look at that fucker.
A whopping, it was a whopping 5 megabyte hard drive.
Yeah, that big round thing is a 5 megabyte hard drive.
This contraption would consume a huge amount of real estate in the family living room.
You need a desk just for your hard drive.
And this was just the hard drive. Once all the other necessary components were added, it had a massive footprint. The hard drive alone was priced at a mere $3,000, which is equivalent to around $34,000 in today's money, and it was far from being sophisticated.
Yeah,
as you can see,
that is just one.
So they paid a lot of money for a lump of crap.
That is one component from a computer.
It doesn't look like it. It looks like an AC unit, or like a heating or cooling unit.
Yeah,
it's a flux capacitor, everybody.
It's a flux capacitor.
It's fucking massive. That's one component. That is a 5, not gigabyte, a megabyte, 5 megabyte hard drive.
And remember
look at the size of that fucker, and look at the size of the lunar module.
Yeah, they've got to somehow fit that bastard in there, or something equivalent.
That's insane. So not only were these machines needed to be made, purchased, and housed at ground control, adaptions and additional programming was needed to make them applicable for this truly unique endeavor, right? Yeah. So training would have been required, and people using these new devices had to not just be slightly familiar with the units, but become experts with them, as there was no room for error.
We know computers fuck up quite a bit of the time, even today.
Yeah. So it doesn't stop there, though. They had those Goliath computer systems that filled the room they housed. They had to now somehow condense these contraptions small enough to fit into a space module, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously the tech and components used in these were far too large. So again, it would require a lot more time, money, and effort to reduce the size or discover alternative components needed to make it possible. Yeah. Some people would suggest that if it was possible to make a computer to fit into a small, cramped 3-man module, then why do we see these dinosaur-looking machines in the photographs provided by NASA rather than smaller units sitting on the desks?
Yeah.
So suggesting that it was all they had, and so it was impossible at the time to have a computer in the module itself. Considering that even in the early 90s, home computers were quite bulky yet quite simple in power terms, capability, and in terms of operating system, using DOS or
DOS.
Remember DOS? Yeah. Or Windows 3.0. It is understandable as to why people would arrive at this conclusion. They were also massively expensive and extremely slow. The World Wide Web was not commonplace, and they would be utilized for only basic operations like creating spreadsheets, for instance.
Yeah. You imagine being up in, I mean, I know they didn't have Windows 3.0 in the 60s, that didn't come till later, but can you imagine being up in space and about to land your little lunar module with your little shitty calculator, your computer that's equivalent to the power of a calculator, and then you get the blue screen of death.
Oh, yeah.
Windows has encountered a problem and needs to shut down. Like, oh my fucking god!
I think I've solved the problem why there were so many accidents, because they were like, right, let's get this hard drive in this machine. Wow, weighs a fucking ton. Are you sure it's gonna be all right? Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah, we've not got enough fuel for all the fucking weight it takes for this shitty computer. Yeah. Right, we have seen the size of electronic devices reduce considerably over a short number of years. Yet, with every reduction in size, their capabilities have doubled. So why, if we have witnessed these advances every year, were they so big and so stupid for so long? Why is it that we never had an equivalent sized computer in our homes in 1990 that was apparently used inside the lunar space module?
Yeah.
Because if it had been created in the 60s, why did we not have it in the 90s?
Or the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Yeah.
Communication is another very, very questionable aspect that was a key in the moon landing. As we know, the first satellite, Sputnik 1, was launched in 1957. Its capabilities were extremely limited, however, and its flight only lasted for 3 weeks, when its basic 3 silver zinc batteries ran out. So it ran out of batteries.
Ran out of batteries.
They should have got
Ran out of juice.
Yeah.
They needed some Duracell in there. And it came crashing back down to Earth. It wasn't until 1958 that America launched their first satellite, Explorer 1, which was used to record weather patterns from low Earth orbit. It was the radiation detector on the satellite that discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. These belts play a huge part in this conspiracy, and actually one of the strongest and most compelling pieces of evidence that suggests and supports the theory that prevents humanity from actually leaving low Earth orbit. By 1961, there were 115 satellites in use, so it's possible to assume that satellites played a huge part in communication between the Apollo and the Earth's ground team. Even though there was a delay, the communication, however, was surprisingly good, and there were no connection or signal issues.
Yeah.
No.
Which is a strange thing. I mean,
None at all.
What?
Not a fucking sausage.
I was actually surprised how many satellites they'd launched by that time, and I hate to imagine how many there is today.
Oh,
But even now, look, we still have issues anyway. But when we seem to be plagued by connection issues here today on Earth, which we do, with all our advanced communication devices, for many it's questionable how this miracle communication occurred 240,000 miles apart, talking easily and freely to men in a module wearing spacesuits, both created with protective properties. So the spacesuits all had protective layers.
They had to be shielded against the radiation.
The craft, apparently protected. So I'm certain if I was to take myself to an extremely remote location,
Like, just say the middle of the Sahara Desert.
cover myself and a phone in layers of fabric, foil, plastic, and whatever the hell they used, I'm sure the phone call wouldn't even connect.
You wouldn't even have to. You just have to stand in the middle of the desert, and you wouldn't get a signal.
I just have to go in the other room sometimes. Yeah. I don't think that the phone call would even connect, let alone the connectivity and clarity we witnessed between the astronauts, the ground team, and even President Nixon himself. So lights, camera, action.
But even a satellite phone has got its limitations.
Yeah, there's issues with all of them. Yeah, these sort of things happen.
Yeah.
So far, we've barely scratched the surface, yet this evidence that apparently doesn't exist is mounting up, and from this point onwards, it's only to get more damning. Okay, so let's look at another one of the conspiracy theorists' questions often put forward in these debates. Some people find it to understand how a space rocket, when launched from Earth, requires a huge amount of fuel and use up and dumps these tanks so early in the flight. Yet return flight is made in a small module and using very fuel in comparison. Now, I've mentioned this one. This I sort of kind of explain this, or Danielle's going to tell you. It's up to you if you believe that's true or not. But go on,
so the explanation of this issue requires a belief that not everything about space and traveling through space is a fabrication. When a rocket takes off, it is faced with resistances. For one, it is going against gravity. It's easier and quicker to fall from a cliff or a cliff top than it is to climb one, right? So Earth's atmosphere is much greater than that on the moon. And even though no one can explain the point at which atmosphere on Earth ends and space really begins, again, at some point, this issue becomes non-existent, and we can guess the distance between the moon's atmosphere and space should be much less. Therefore, it would be feasible to assume that taking off from the moon would be much simpler than taking off from Earth. Once in space, a small thrust of the engines would go a long way in regard to propulsion. We can manage to throw a rock further on dry land than we can underwater. In most of our lifetimes, we have witnessed comets. We have seen them shoot through space like lightning, and they don't require a ton of fuel to do so. They are fueled by ice, gas, and the sun. And the astronauts also use gravitational forces of the planetary objects for propulsion and pull. Finally, after they enter Earth's orbit, technically they are falling. It is only recently that methods and practices are being put into place to actually land a rocket on solid ground, as opposed to having them crash land into the ocean.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Now, out of like all the questions that are raised regarding whether anything, even if it was unmanned, managed to land on the moon, one of the things that people often purport is that there's no way, because of the fuel requirements that they take to get off Earth, there's no way that it could have took off for the moon and came back. That, however, is the only one that I actually understand.
so that's 1 point to them. 1-0.
Yeah, I don't mean it was manned, but in the basic laws of physics, there is an equation. It's like speed equals distance over time, and the gravity is going to play a big part in that. And the fact that there's a different gravity means that it's different methods of propulsion, different atmospheric conditions, and you wouldn't need the same amount of energy or fuel in order to acquire the liftoff and the speed. So
that's why there was.
If you actually understand physics,
no, but which I don't. But
the basic principles of physics, it is possible that you wouldn't. Well, it's not possible. It's like it's true. You wouldn't need as much energy in a different gravity environment, a lower gravity environment, as you do because of the resistances. You've got certain resistances on Earth.
You've got weather on Earth.
So the resistance that gravity is causing on Earth for a takeoff is using more energy to get through that. On a different object, a different celestial body that's not got those resistances, you need less fuel.
No, we only go by what we know about space by the information of them.
Yeah,
which
that's what they've told us.
However,
that's assuming that there's no gravity on the moon. I don't know.
There is things we can test on Earth, and there is facilities you can go to and test these sort of things, and people have done, and I've seen it for myself. So that's why I don't go with that one, because I can see the difference. Like I said about the cliff, I wrote about the cliff and the throwing the stone, because you can do that yourself here. So there's things you can test. So I can see that point. So I wouldn't necessarily say that requires the same amount of fuel.
Right, and we have waffled and waffled and waffled.
Yeah, probably too long.
And now we're in 15 minutes now. So take a little break from the constant waffling, and we're going to play you a couple of little video clips. We'll pause at certain intervals and discuss certain aspects.
Okay.
Just to give you a little break from us waffling, and to give us a little break from actually waffling, and something a bit more interesting. You can watch a little video. So the first one I'm going to show you is actually in full. It's 10 minutes long, but we're not going to just play 10 minutes at you. We will stop and discuss.
Yeah.
And that is this one.
Oh, you got it there. Yeah.
Someone apparently forgot to create a burn crater underneath the lunar module's 10,000-pound thrust engine, despite the fact that during ground tests there was a real concern for the vehicle falling into the hole the engine created as it descended.
So they're saying that it came down, there was obviously fire or propulsion coming out at the bottom, and there's no burn on the ground.
Okay.
Here is a depiction based on the latest specifications and scientific data. In these enlargements, it looks as though the lunar module was simply placed there, not even one speck of moon dust on the landing pod. As a result, all subsequent flights had to have the same discrepancy, which was explained away by the effect of no atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if no atmosphere would cause that, but I mean, you think that you're landing with a certain amount of force there.
Yeah.
Why is there no dust?
Well, actually, furthermore, one of their explanations of another sort of question thing about the flag, as some of you may know, they say, oh, there's not no atmosphere, it's low atmosphere. So is there an atmosphere or not? They can't even decide on that one.
I don't know if there would be dust.
Yeah, don't know.
Because I've never been and I've not experienced that environment.
No, but
Then there's the flag, blowing in the wind, at least twice, on the atmosphereless moon. Here it is unchecked. This rare clip, attained decades ago, was never re-released with the inevitable increase in experience and scrutiny. It is clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that...
So, as for the flag, their explanation for the flag is that the flag was specially created and it had a metal rod running horizontally across the top of the flag, which needed to be extended to hold it outright. And it didn't get extended properly, which caused it to momentarily flap whilst it was being twisted by the astronaut into the ground.
why would they have had a
It
horizontal?
only moved when it was being twisted.
What's that, Danielle?
I've never heard of that before. Like, and why would they need the horizontal?
Because if it didn't have the horizontal, it wouldn't like be out. It would just hang down. So they needed something to hold it out because there's no wind.
Okay,
Allegedly. That's the explanation for that. I don't know though. It just. I don't know. I've got questions about that because obviously there
I
have
have questions about a lot of it.
well, especially with like things like the flag and things that were left on the moon. I'm not saying that it was left on the moon by Apollo 11, but like China and India have had missions to the moon since. Wouldn't they be like, wait a minute, where's your fucking flag? Because apparently there was a flag left by every Apollo mission, so there should be 6 American flags at all those points I showed you earlier on the moon.
Yeah,
Wouldn't it be noticeable that they weren't there?
one would think.
The crew of Apollo 11 brought a high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission. Yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images, second generation, off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's another point of contention. All the media outlets that broadcast the moon landing around the world weren't given access to the live feed that NASA was apparently using. They were allowed to all film a projected screen of footage, so that it was like secondhand. They were filming a screen. So it's like if you're trying to record a TV program, it's like getting a video recorder and recording your TV instead of just recording it from the original source.
Is that like common knowledge? Because I don't remember hearing any of that in school.
Well, it's common knowledge now. I don't know if it was common knowledge. I can't remember getting that in school either, but they never got access to the live feed. They were given a projection screen to aim their cameras at to create a second-hand feed.
And were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. Perhaps this was precisely what NASA and the federal government had in mind. After all, it was a first, regardless of where they were. Better to open up their debut mission with fuzzy pictures and numerous blackouts, rather than show too much revealing detail of a false scene that was yet unproven. An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr., and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason prior to the mission, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit.
So this video that she's now showing you was filmed on 3 different days in quite an orbit that's quite near to Earth. However, on those dates, according to history, that's not where they were.
Yeah, my dad made a good point about them bouncing about. There was dust off the boots, so that seems strange about them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've just come back. So.
I'm back and looking at
Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity aboard the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with, "Talk." Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Apollo 11, Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil, we just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get to playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows, as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we cut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window under it, any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit.
So they're actually a lot closer to Earth, apparently, according to this. And the circle that you're saying is just the window.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not the full Earth you're getting. It's just a portion of the Earth through a circular window.
Which explains its shape, too.
This weird shape.
Yeah.
The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a down.
You can actually, you can see that. You can see the depth of the window slightly at the bottom.
Yeah.
Downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18th, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
So he's now going to claim that the camera is pressed right up against the glass to get the view
The
of
effect of the
the Earth from
shot.
that distance of 130,000
And
miles.
just pay attention to what you see going on about this
So
place.
there's the camera is right up against the window. There's no space.
No, nothing.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth, and
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up, and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
This is a valid point, especially if you believe that they didn't get some of that evidence there.
Yeah.
That was interesting. What do you think of that, Danielle?
I think it's pretty compelling and opens up some more questions and puts furthermore validity to those of us who are skeptical about what really
So
happened.
If they had to fake just a halfway point, why?
Yeah.
Strange.
Exactly.
I mean, we're assuming that this is all. I mean, we check, as best as we can that that's authentic, but and things like that, and it's got timestamps. But who knows? But that if it is the case, then that shows you that has been done, and there's obviously reasons why.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The next video is not as long, so don't panic. It's about crosshairs. I'm going to have a quick look at that. It's about 40 seconds, so we'll just play that and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
For reference, crosshairs were permanently etched into the lunar cameras, so they would have to appear on top of every image. But in this photo, a crosshair is behind a part of the lunar rover.
This situation is impossible and has to be the result of technical manipulation and doctoring of the image.
And in this photo from Apollo 11, the equipment in the foreground is covering the crosshair, not behind it. And in another another from Apollo 12. The American flag is covering one crosshair, and the astronaut is covering the other. Presented with these questionable photos and videos.
It's absolutely unreal.
Look at that.
So again,
Why?
I believe. I mean, NASA's has addressed this issue, and they reckon that it's just us. It's like an optical illusion. You're seeing it appears to be behind these objects, when in fact it is there. It's just so faint because of the.
Why would there be so many optical illusions?
Yeah.
Just on the Apollo,
them things.
Apollo missions, when there is pictures with crosshairs used in a variety of different.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the word I need. Whatever. There's a variety of different examples, occasions where they would have photos with those crosshairs on, but just these ones, the optical illusion occurs where they appear to be behind us.
Yeah.
And now I believe you've got a video about the Van Allen belts, Jamie.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Get rid of that one.
And this is one of the main reasons, if you're not aware of why.
This is the one that gets me.
This is probably the strongest reason why people think.
Further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Hang on. So,
Before they sent people. So this is a more modern. I think this is from the 2000s, early 2000s. Before they send people through that region of space, they're
working on this new module.
They're implying that they can't do that yet.
Yeah.
Oops.
what you're saying is that in order to send humans through this region, we need to solve the challenge of getting through the Van Allen radiation belts. But I'm confused. Didn't you already solve this challenge back in 1969 when you sent astronauts to the moon?
Allegedly.
But we're also really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. I think humans are naturally driven to.
Again, this is an astronaut aboard the International Space Station. And
Allegedly.
Allegedly, because some people don't think that exists either. But this is an astronaut, a NASA astronaut, and let's see what she's got to say about the Van Allen belts.
Do this, and this is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
The beginning?
The beginning, yeah. Exactly.
She's implying there that human beings have never left low Earth orbit, and she wants to be around to see that happen.
Huh.
But apparently, it has happened 6 times in between 1969 and 1972. But if she is,
people argument is that they're referring to the space station and people's flight, in the space station as passengers.
That's not what she
bullshit
said.
Because that
she
other
said,
bloke before said about this designing this module.
I'll replay what she said.
Yeah.
Also really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. I think humans are naturally driven to do this, and this is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
It's where they're going with exploration, and it's the beginning of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. You can't
make that.
Make that mean anything else than what it means.
Plan that NASA has is to build a rocket called SLS, which is a heavy lift rocket. It's something that is much bigger than what we have today, and it will be able to launch the Orion capsule with humans on board, as well as landers or other components to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go.
What? What?
I mean, well, that's there. They're saying it themselves.
And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, the
moon! What?
Wait, I want to hear what Jamie had to say. You cut him off completely.
I'm sorry, Jamie, say it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, again, they're saying it themselves, and then they get upset when they get very angry and aggressive with people who questions this, and here's them saying, making an arsehole of themselves and making it.
They do get very angry. I
do.
seem to recall an incident where a certain second man on the moon punched somebody in the face for suggesting.
Yeah.
Mr. Buzz Aldrin.
Rumor has it.
You ruffian, you.
A lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Is the lunar module
Eventually.
Yeah.
now proudly displayed at the National Air and Space Museum. According to NASA, the primary materials used to build the module were aluminium alloy, stainless steel, titanium, nickel steel.
Sorry, you didn't do that. Aluminium alloy.
No.
Aluminum.
Nickel steel alloy. They're not. It's not a mistake because we've done it twice. Alloy. Why? It's a Y.
Alloy, heat-resistant glass. Now, if this is the case, we have a very serious discrepancy here. If you remember earlier when I went through the different atmospheres that surround the Earth, both the thermosphere and exosphere have temperatures ranging from 0 to 2000 degrees Celsius. So I decided to examine the melting points of the primary metals that we used to build the lunar module. First off, we have the aluminium alloy, which has a melting point of 463 degrees Celsius. Next, we have stainless steel, which has a melting point of 1510 degrees Celsius. Then we also have nickel steel alloy, which melts at 1453 degrees Celsius. And of course, the heat-resistant glass for the windows, which has a melting point of 760 degrees Celsius. So this would mean that the lunar module, along with its occupants, would have disintegrated well before it even passed through the thermosphere, let alone surviving the Van Allen radiation belts in the exosphere. To protect the astronauts from the Van Allen radiation belts, the lunar module would have required 6 feet of lead shielding. But here's what they really had for protection.
Obviously, the only shielding they had was the literally paper-thin outer hull of aluminum, and their suits consisting of glass fiber, some aluminum fibers, and silicon rubber.
It's very interesting concerning radiation that the astronauts were protected by a thin film of aluminum when here on Earth they put a lead shield on us when they take a dental x-ray.
In conclusion, when NASA themselves admit to never having left low Earth orbit, and the fact that we don't even have the materials that could withstand the extreme temperatures and cosmic rays in space, how on earth can anyone believe that we ever went to the moon?
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore.
We
used to?
Yeah, this is an actual NASA astronaut saying they didn't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology. And it's a painful process to build it back up again. Well, you've got like a full one sitting in a museum.
Yeah, reverse engineer.
Used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
The kinds of technologies that we're testing out on space station are definitely helping us with our goals of going beyond low Earth orbit.
Early in the next decade, a set of crewed flights will test and prove the systems required for exploration beyond low Earth orbit.
When interviewed, Alan Bean of Apollo 12 initially stated that he had not gone through the belts and did not observe any effects caused by them.
Any ill effects from the Van Allen radiation belts?
No, I'm not sure we went far enough out to encounter the Van Allen radiation belt.
And he was on the Apollo 12.
He's not even sure where.
He didn't even know where he went. Like,
maybe he did.
Did you get any effects for going through the massive radiation belts on the way to the moon? Oh, I don't know. I don't know where I've been. What are you on about?
Maybe we did.
When it was,
I think the radiations went to his brain.
Pointed out that the flight pattern took him through the belts, he changed his story.
The belts are 1,000 miles to 25,000 miles above the Earth.
We went right out through them.
No effects on your cells?
We didn't even know it. I don't think anybody, well, maybe somebody said you went through the radiation belt, but we didn't feel it inside, and we didn't get any, added radiation.
Yeah.
Is that so? Is that so?
He also talks about on there, which I didn't include, about the batteries and the backpacks and like again, this guy explains about all the temperatures there. These batteries, as we saw, this old satellite died and crashed with these insufficient batteries. Yet these battery packs, which are like little battery packs that you use on like disabled mobility scooters and things like that, apparently they're powering the module, they're powering the little parasol satellite thing,
like the same batteries.
Their air conditioning, their breathing equipment, everything is being powered by these little batteries.
And that's the same batteries that was on like the equivalent what was on Sputnik that ran out in a couple of days. So what do you think about that, Danielle? That especially that last clip when you've got actual NASA astronauts.
I don't know. BS comes
and
to
the president and Obama.
Yeah.
No.
No, go back to what we said.
There's weight, and it's like Jamie said, and then they wonder why we get so skeptical about things. But they look at the footage that we just saw how do they even explain this away? You can't. They just expect everybody to believe.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. I mean,
yeah.
Think for yourselves. Do your research.
Right. Well, that is
sense.
Yeah, that is only the beginning. There is a hell of a lot more. However, this would be a very, very, very long episode if we done the entire thing. Yeah. So we will continue this next week and go over a lot more of the questions, the very valid questions as to did we land on the moon at this juncture, based on what we just watched. It's not looking likely. However, there is the possibility that, yes, we did have the technology because maybe we found the technology from another race of beings.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe somebody that crashed in Roswell or at Shag Harbor.
And then they just ran out of the material.
And they reverse engineered and reused that technology to get to the moon. Possibly not on the Apollo 11. That might have been completely faked. I'm not even convinced on that. But to actually lose the technology, they must have had a limited amount of that technology, if that is indeed the case. That's another possibility that some people believe, that they used alien technology and they used it up.
Now, here's where we are now. Look, we know we weren't intending on, but obviously the show is, pushing on for the 2-hour mark yet again, which we didn't want. But again, apparently nothing exists, nothing's tangible, nothing, yet here we are.
If there's no evidence, if there's no evidence, we wouldn't be here nearly 2 hours in.
Too much splaining to do.
There's a lot more to go through. So, for this week, we're going to wrap it up. We will be back with even more evidence to either convince you that we did go to the moon or convince you that we did not. Next Tuesday. In the meantime, we're going to let Danielle escape and have a big glass of wine and go and pamper the shit out of herself because it's her 24th birthday. And thank you so much for joining us. I'll say goodbye and I'll leave you to Danielle and Jamie to say their goodbyes.
Yeah.
Danielle.
All right. Me and Danielle are just waiting for each other.
Danielle, you go first. You can say goodbye.
We're both
Thank you for joining us as usual. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for the notifications and share if you would. We also have a website at, thecuriouscasefiles.com.
Certainly is.
And you can check out many things, items in our bios and all that kinds of stuff in there. We appreciate your support and joining us each week. Thank you so much for the birthday wishes. It's not every day a girl turns 24. Again and again.
Again and again and again. 24 times.
But thank you. I appreciate that. And all of you. So love to you all. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next Tuesday. Jamie?
Yeah. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. That was, fairly long, but that was needed, I think. And you can see there's so much, and it is revealing. I'm glad you enjoyed it, or you are enjoying it. And there's a lot more to do. We've got to look about the astronauts where, when they're being interviewed, their demeanors and things like that. So a lot more to cover. We may even have moon rocks next week in our store. No, we wouldn't.
No, we wouldn't. But we might be talking about them.
We're speaking about
We might be talking about them, but I'm not selling them.
So, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Love you all.
See ya.